The world that the hero lived in was far from normal. It was fractured, torn open by gates that shattered the boundaries of reality and unleashed monsters into the streets and forests. These beasts roamed with hunger and violence, leaving humanity no choice but to fight. And so he fought. Day by day, month after month, year after year, for 10 long years he survived. Every passing moment was consumed by struggle. Yet through it all, with only a single sword in hand, he learned to cut down any monster that dared to challenge him. Fear had long since left him. The dread that once haunted his every breath had vanished over time. But change came unexpectedly. The mastermind behind all the chaos finally revealed himself. This powerful being confronted the hero, delivering a chilling truth. The world he had fought so fiercely to protect had already fallen. The creature mocked his efforts, calling it a waste of talent. It urged him to abandon everything and become its sword instead. But the hero refused. There was no hesitation, no second thought. He laughed in defiance and launched an attack directly at the creature. His blade struck its massive fingers, but the blow did nothing. The monster remained completely unaffected. Then, without warning, the beast countered. One punch was all it took. The impact sent him flying, overwhelmed and helpless. The monster's voice dripped with mockery. It declared that no matter how much he struggled, he would always be nothing more than an insect. Still, he didn't give up. He rose again, charged forward, and attacked with everything he had. The result didn't change. Another blow hurled him into the ground. As he lay there, something caught his eye. A pendant hung from the monster's chest. Instinct told him it was important. With all the strength he had left, he threw his sword at the pendant. The blade struck perfectly, and a hole blasted open in the monster's chest. The beast roared in fury, calling him a bastard as pain rippled through its body. After the clash, the hero lay still, looking up at the sky. Despite the chaos and the pain, the view above was stunning. The scene shifts to another place, where we see that another boy walked toward the Namsen gate. Upon reaching it, he was instructed to register his number and scan his unique identification. The staff reminded him that civilians without proper hero status couldn't enter. But he didn't follow the rules. He simply kicked the gate open and walked in, catching everyone's attention as an unregistered hero who had forced his way through. Nearby, a group emerged from the forest. One of them called out to the boy, saying they had lost something and were just about to leave. They casually invited him to join them. A girl in the group took a closer look at him. Something felt off. His clothes didn't match what a typical hunter would wear. Though she knew hunters wore all sorts of gear nowadays, his outfit and baggage felt strange. She wondered if he had made a mistake and thought he was part of the hero squad. The others started talking. One of them said he had already mentioned that this guy was new. Their leader finally spoke. He said he had seen many people like him before. He understood what newcomers often believed after watching hunting videos or reading about gates online. But things weren't that simple. Becoming a hunter required going through proper channels, licensing, training, and passing strict tests. If the boy wanted to start, he would have to begin at the very bottom, F rank, and work his way up. The boy, on the other hand, understood the meaning behind their words but didn't feel grateful. That annoyed some of them. One bald man reacted angrily, unable to hold back. Another, younger one, asked not to be stopped this time, hopping for a chance. The team leader continued, making it clear that if someone ignored sincere advice, they would eventually have to face the reality for themselves. He explained that the gates were nothing like the fantasies people imagined. They were brutal, violent, and unforgiving places. Just then an orc appeared before them. It charged forward with menace. But without saying a word, the boy calmly placed his baggage on the ground and muttered to himself that it had been 10 years. Then, with a single punch, he obliterated the orc's head. The blow was powerful and swift, scattering the creature's remains in an instant. It was then that we come to know that the mysterious boy was actually the hero we talked about previously, and as the silence returned and dust settled, he whispered softly. To him, nothing had changed at all. We come to know that the hero had gone in the past and had reincarnated in a body of a boy named Dajan. Dajan gripped the sword in his hands tightly, the weight of it familiar after years of wielding such weapons. From the body of the fallen beast, he extracted a low-grade magic stone. He examined it briefly, recalling a time in the past when he wouldn't have even glanced at something of such poor quality. Back then, stones like this would have been considered grime, worthless, and beneath notice. Suddenly, voices echoed from behind him. Several tones, distinct and alert, came from a group approaching from the rear. One of the flames from his earlier attack still lingered in the air. Without hesitation and still holding the mana stone, he responded to the threat. In an instant, he killed one of them. The bag he carried had served its purpose, so he threw it aside without a second thought. As the old team began to move away, some of the girls within the group couldn't help but speak up. One of them commented on that rude guy from earlier, wondering aloud if he might really end up dead. Another girl questioned if she was actually worried about him. The leader stepped in to provide clarity. He stated that if the boy was an intruder, then by now, agents from the control center would have been dispatched. After all, this was a Namsen gate, a high-ranking gate labeled a rank. As such, elite agents of rank B or higher would be sent in response. The leader assured them that as long as the boy didn't lose his mind and recklessly charge into hordes of monsters, he wouldn't die. There was no need for concern. The bald man agreed, saying the leader was right. He imagined the boy must be shaking with fear right now, just standing still and waiting for the agents to come save him. He repeated that idea, convinced the arrogant punk they had encountered earlier would surely be trembling, unable to act. But the reality was quite the opposite. While they believed he was frozen in fear, it was the troll in front of Dajun who was shaking. Without hesitation, Dajun punched the troll squarely in the face, the blow echoing with raw force. Another troll lunged at him, trying to strike, but Dajun dodged the attack swiftly. He retreated a short distance, then jumped, using that momentum to propel himself upward. He landed atop the troll and delivered a brutal leg strike, finishing it off with crushing power. After the dust settled, he noted to himself that 3 more magic stones had been added to his collection. He assessed his total haul so far, 12 low-grade stones and 6 blue tier-mid-grade stones. It wasn't the most impressive harvest, he admitted to himself. Still, he continued on. He looked back. Standing behind him now were agents from the gate control center. They had arrived and promptly announced themselves. They requested he show his hero registration ID. If he was unregistered, they informed him he would need to accompany them to the control center for proper documentation. The voice representing the gate control center repeated the request, asking him to comply with their instructions. Dajun, already annoyed, thought to himself about how irritating the situation was. He didn't speak his frustration aloud, but the irritation was clear in his expression. The lead agent then instructed his subordinate to prepare the restraints. He added a formal request for Dajun's cooperation. If he refused, they would be permitted to use physical force. Another warning followed. Any injury resulting from resistance, the agent explained, would be entirely Dajun's responsibility. The best solution, the agent said, would be to resolve the issue calmly at the control center. Dajun reached out and grabbed the agent's hand. Instantly, the agent's confidence evaporated. He was struck by the overwhelming pressure radiating from Dajun, a force far beyond what he expected. The agent froze in terror. Dajun gave a brief warning, "Don't bother him, just leave." The other 2 agents prepared to launch an attack in response, but Dajun stayed calm. He evaluated them and considered their strength. A rank 4 magic seed, he thought, might work on ordinary monsters like orcs. But this situation was different. He looked directly at the agents and gave one final warning. If they didn't want to get hurt, they should leave now. Dajun moved without hesitation. The attacks that came his way were stopped effortlessly. With just a single sweep of his cape, he sent one opponent flying. Another came at him, but that one too was knocked away with ease. He turned his head slightly and in an instant disappeared from sight. In the next moment, he reappeared right in front of the agent and drove a punch straight into his stomach. The agent groaned, caught off guard, but managed to speak. He said that registered heroes didn't typically face any problems unless they committed particularly illegal acts inside the gate. Dajun asked what the rules were about rift zones. The agent faltered, visibly disturbed by the question. He thought about passages opening up all over the world, zones of chaos and danger. Monsters emerged from them, and from these hunts, byproducts like magic stones were harvested and converted into new forms of energy. The government kept strict control over such areas. Places fully under surveillance were labeled as gates. But the unknown, uncontrolled passages, those were called rift zones. Dajun asked again. No matter which gate he entered, would the authorities always come for him, accusing him of trespassing or worse? The agent confirmed this. If an unregistered hero entered a gate without authorization, the control center would be automatically alerted. Agents on standby near the scene would be dispatched immediately. He added that rift zones weren't easy to access, and even in such unstable airspace, the association would not simply sit back. Dajun shrugged, unconcerned. The agent looked at him with fear. He thought to himself that this boy must be insane. He cursed inwardly, regretting that he hadn't reported the incident to headquarters from the start. But as he turned to run, Dajun grabbed him by the face and threw him aside. He dismissed the man as nothing more than a nobody. Another agent stepped forward, angered. He shouted that next time he'd definitely kill Dajun, but the scene shifted to another flashback. The monster that Dajun had previously killed still lay where it fell. Its necklace, once whole, was now shattered. Dajun reflected on what had happened. He remembered the voice that had screamed so close to his ears before everything went dark. It had felt like his consciousness was being pulled into another realm. That sensation, he could only describe it as death. But just then, he opened his eyes. Standing before him was a boy. The boy asked who he was. Dajun replied with his name. The other soul said he was dying, and if his final request was granted, he would disappear quietly. Dajun refused. The dying man explained that he no longer had any attachment to life. After fighting for 10 years, he had been betrayed by a comrade he had once trusted. His country had been destroyed. His friends were dead. His family, too. Despite struggling and surviving for so long, he had faced hunger and despair, and he guessed Dajun knew that feeling as well. Dajun answered that even if his life was miserable, he didn't want the same for his remaining grandmother and Yang. They deserved better. The soul paused, then asked for one thing. What did Dajun want? Dajun responded with a wish. The narration shifted to the cityscape of Seoul, specifically to the area now known as the Hero Complex. The region, once filled with tech and digital companies, was now dominated by exchanges dealing in gate byproducts. Dajun walked the streets, glancing at shop signs and wondering which place to enter. He made his way into one and was greeted by a cashier. He stated that he wanted to sell some mana stones. The cashier welcomed him, boasting they had the best rates not only in Seoul but in all of Korea. Dajun pulled out a bag full of mana stones and emptied it onto the table. The cashier stared at the bloody stones, silently thinking they could have at least been cleaned. Nonetheless, the cashier commented on the large quantity and began sorting through them. While doing so, he offered Dajun a cup of coffee while he waited. Dajun agreed. Once sorted, the cashier gave the assessment: 12 low, grade mana stones, 16 mid, low grade, and 5 high, low grade ones. He reminded Dajun that the commission was 40% of the purchase price and hoped he was aware of that. After a moment of calculation, he told Dajun that his total payout would be 5.46 million won. Dajun objected. He had done all the hunting and all the store did was buy the goods, yet they wanted 40% of the cut. The cashier was unfazed. He explained that Dajun clearly didn't understand how things worked. In fact, they usually charged 45%, but this time they were offering him a better deal. If he didn't like it, he could take the stones elsewhere, but he likely wouldn't get a better price. Dajun responded that he would do just that. He began collecting his mana stones back into the bag, but the cashier stopped him. He reminded Dajun that sorting wasn't free. There was a sorting fee of 300,000 won plus 10 won for the coffee. Since they had to use an expensive towel to wipe off the blood and now couldn't use it anymore, he owed an additional 50,000 won for the towel. In total, the cashier demanded 350,000 won. Dajun said he didn't have the money. If they wanted it, they could try to take it by force. The cashier warned him. He said that they had some C-rank heroes supporting them. These weren't weaklings. Just then, the heroes entered the shop. One of them asked what was going on and whether someone was causing trouble again. Then they saw each other. The boy began by tearing through the C-rank mercenaries who posed as heroes. All 3 of them were beaten down without much effort. After the last one fell, he stepped up to the cashier calmly. He told him the commission would now be 1%. It was best to keep things smooth from now on. He promised he would return again. Back at home, he handed all the money he earned to an elderly woman and a young girl. The grandmother looked at the bundle and asked what all that money was. The boy explained that some time ago, he had lent money to a friend starting a business, and that business had turned into a massive success. The grandmother asked if he truly had such a friend. He replied that back where he grew up, there had been a friend he hung around with. She responded that, of course, she remembered that place. The young girl turned to him, eyes bright, asking if they were rich now. He nodded and said yes, from now on, things would be different. She laughed and danced around the room, excitedly repeating that they were becoming rich. He fell into thought, remembering a time in the past. The real Dajin had once spoken to himself, saying he hoped Grandma and Yang would be able to live in a house safer than anywhere else. Then, without even waiting for a reply, he had vanished. When the hero's soul that replaced him awoke, he had become Dajin. The safest house in Korea at the current market price cost 110 billion won. There was no obligation for him to fulfill such a one-sided promise, but he thought that if his strength returned even a little, that amount of money would mean nothing. To him, rifts, gates, and monsters were all weaker than what he had known in his own world. Compared to his past battles as a sword god, this world felt like child's play. Yet not even 10% of his full strength had returned to him. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling out. It asked if he was there. He stood up and told them he would go check. They should stay inside. Outside, he was met by a group of gangsters. They greeted him with mocking words, reminding him about repaying borrowed money. They demanded to know if he realized how much he owed now. The sum had grown to 48 million won. He quickly realized who they were. The loan sharks the real Dajin had borrowed money from before dying. The 5 million won once borrowed to pay for Grandma's hospital bills had now multiplied tenfold in an extremely short time. The biggest of the group stepped forward, smirking. He claimed they knew Dajin had made money through a gate recently and demanded he hand over every last one. Another, a shorter thug, said they were only taking what was due according to the contract and told him not to feel wronged. Before the words could fully leave the man's mouth, a punch landed square on the big guy's face. It was him. He had struck the gangster without hesitation. The small guy stumbled back, shocked. He stammered, offering apologies. He calmly explained that he had already repaid over 9 million won. If anyone should be owed money, it was him. The loan shark, trembling in fear, asked if he was really Dajin. He gave him a sharp look and told him to pass along a message to their boss. He would be paying him a visit soon. Then, without a hint of mercy, he punched the small guy too. Later, with his half-sister, he visited a teddy shop. Yang asked if she could buy some teddies and a new doll. He smiled and told her she could buy anything she wanted. They had already bought clothes, so now it was time to get what she liked. As he watched her, thoughts stirred within him. The more memories he shared with this life, the more something inside him changed. There were emotions growing in his heart. For now, it was just compassion, but he could feel it building. Dajin had been kind. Even toward Yang, his half-sister, there had been warmth. He decided that at the very least he would protect that part of Dajin's heart. She pointed at a ragged doll and asked if she could have it. Instead, he handed her a large, brand new one and reminded her that she could choose anything she liked. Her face lit up, and she beamed with joy. They ate out at a small restaurant. Just as they were finishing, a woman approached them. She looked surprised and wondered aloud if it was really Dajin she was seeing. She looked him up and down, nodding that he didn't seem to be dressed well. She added that he didn't look like much and then asked who was next to him. With sharp words, she accused him of causing trouble, just like his mother. The girl turned to him and quietly asked who that lady was. The woman stared at the girl and asked for her name. The girl quietly answered that her name was Yang. The woman sneered and mocked her, saying she must be from that family. She looked her over with distaste and criticized the clothes she wore, saying she looked just like her mother. Then she turned her attention to the boy and mocked his silence, asking if he had nothing to say. She leaned in cruelly, calling the girl a rat and asking if she even knew what the word whore meant. Just then he stood up and responded coldly, calling the woman an ugly wretch who looked like an orc. She was stunned by his reaction. His thoughts drifted back to his past. He had been born out of wedlock and raised in poverty. At the age of 7, after his mother died, he was finally taken in by his biological father. But that life offered little comfort. For more than a decade, he suffered discrimination, scorn, and neglect. When the legal wife gave birth to a son, he was pushed aside again. He was eventually thrown out and forced to live with a maternal grandmother and a half. sibling he had never known. What kind of pain must he have endured through all of that? He thought to himself that things would be different now. He addressed the woman again, reminding her that they had lived together for 12 years. Yet, despite all that time, she still looked at him with disgust. He told her that her fake personality, her face, even her dull mind, all of it was hopeless. The bodyguards nearby were frozen in shock by his boldness. The boy didn't stop. He accused her of being jealous of girls who were kinder or more beautiful than her. He said she was consumed by an inferiority complex and, in truth, no better in any way than this young girl, who at least cared about her brother well-being. Furious, the girl snapped at him, demanding to know what he had just said. But before things escalated further, another woman arrived. The girl immediately ran to her and started complaining. She told her what he had said, angry and upset. But the woman simply told her to stay out of it and called her behavior uncultured. Turning her attention to him, she asked if he had been doing well. She added that even if he had been busy, it would have been nice if he came home once in a while. His thoughts turned cold. He remembered how this woman had tormented him for 12 years more than anyone else. She tried to continue, saying that his father worried about him deeply, but he shut her down. He said that their relationship was not one where they asked about each other's well-being. He told her to get lost. Even she was taken aback by his words. She wondered if this was really the same Dajin she used to know, the boy who used to bow his head in silence even when slapped without reason. The girl ran after her mother, calling out for her to wait. He turned and told why, young it was time to go. She agreed, and they walked away. In his mind, he said farewell to the version of himself who used to stay silent while being mistreated. He warned them that it would be in their best interest to realize he was no longer that person. Meanwhile, in the car, the fat girl complained to her mother. She couldn't understand why they just left without doing anything. She argued that they should have crushed him right there and repeated what he had said to her. But then her mother turned serious and asked the driver why Dajin was still alive. The driver spoke up, explaining that, according to the report, the man with him had left him inside a rift zone. The woman repeated her question. Why was that bastard who should have died still breathing? The driver apologized and promised to investigate further. Her daughter was confused and horrified. She asked her mother what she meant. Had she really tried to kill him? But the mother wanted to know if the girl still had feelings for him. The girl immediately denied it and told the lady it wasn't what she thought. But the girl warned her that if their grandfather or father ever found out, things could become dangerous. Without waiting for more questions, the mother silenced her daughter. She said that this was something she, as the mother, would handle and told the girl to stay out of it. Then, deep in her thoughts, she cursed him, calling him a low-born bastard, and vowed that no matter what, she would make him disappear. 10 years ago, the rift zones began to appear. From within them, monsters surged into the world, slaughtering people without mercy. Global chaos followed, a wave of destruction spreading rapidly. But then came the heroes, individuals capable of resisting the monstrous tide. With their emergence, the panic began to ease. From the slain monsters came magical stones. These stones quickly replaced conventional energy sources, powering the world in ways no one had imagined before. Nations around the globe shifted their focus, converting the unstable rift zones into regulated gates. Society evolved, and soon every major industry was centered around gates and heroes. To survive, to thrive, to make money, becoming a hero was now essential. In the bustling district of Yongdyungpo, inside the headquarters of HCS Capital, a confrontation unfolded. Dajin stood tall and unyielding as the boss demanded to know who he was. Behind the boss stood 2 of his men, bruised and defeated. The boss growled, asking how he dared show his face there after wrecking his crew. The boy replied calmly, stating that the more he thought about it, the more he realized he had taken a loss. Confused, the boss asked what he meant. He explained that he deserved compensation, both physical and material, for all the damage caused. The boss watched him closely, sensing something had changed. His demeanor was sharper, more confident. This wasn't the same person they once knew. He speculated that maybe the gate had awakened him, given him new power. The boss scoffed and said that people like him, arrogant pricks who bragged about awakening, always met the same fate. He gestured toward 3 new arrivals, reminding him that they too had awakened but ended up as nothing more than D-rank trash. He warned that he had plenty of D-rank thugs under his command, people who wouldn't even let him speak. 5 men stepped forward, surrounding him. Undeterred, he told them all to sit down. He wasn't finished talking. One of the underlings barked back, trying to put him in his place. But before the man could finish speaking, he removed his spectacles and landed a punch straight to the underling's face, knocking him out cold. Just then, Dajan turned to the others and stated that he knew their operation extended beyond loan sharking. They were forging hero IDs too. If he was going to start making real money, he needed a clean ID, one that wouldn't cause trouble down the line. He made it clear. Bring him a flawless ID by tomorrow. No excuses. The boss and his crew stared in stunned silence. They couldn't comprehend what kind of strength they had just witnessed. This wasn't a D-rank fighter. Maybe not even C, he could be a B rank or more. Overwhelmed and realizing the stakes, the boss agreed. Before leaving, the boy brought up one more thing. He asked if Hong Hiju had been the one who gave the order to kill him. A shadow of the past crossed his mind. Still, the boss didn't answer immediately. Pressed again, he finally gave in. He admitted that, yes, it had been that woman. She said she hoped he'd be buried in debt and driven to suicide. The boss begged for mercy, but Dajan remained silent, thinking over the words. So that was the reason. Suicide, she had hoped he'd lose everything and end his own life. He asked again about being trapped in the gate. The boss denied any involvement. He insisted that he didn't know anything about it. Why would he send someone to their death if he was still owed money? It made no sense, he claimed. But the truth settled in. He knew now this was the man who had dragged him into the gate, the one responsible for everything. He gave one final order: bring every bit of information they had on him by tomorrow. The boss nodded desperately, agreeing to everything. He turned and walked out, his thoughts filled with a quiet determination. He remembered the last wish of the one who came before him, a desire to see his grandmother and sister live in a home safer than any other. That wish burned in his mind. Without someone like him to fulfill it, it would have died unspoken. And so he vowed silently. While he was at it, he would do more than just survive. By the next day, Dajan had obtained his hunter's license. Officially, he was now recognized as a B-rank adventurer, or hero. At the entrance of the gate, he scanned the license card through the machine. A robotic voice echoed, confirming the hero registration card had been verified. The system warned that his level was below the recommended grade and urged him to proceed cautiously and think carefully before entering. He muttered to himself that the agency should have just raised it to an A rank instead. Yet the automated warning continued to repeat that the level was below the recommended grade. The gate he stood before was known as the Poison Gate, classified as a B-grade dungeon. Entry was not permitted unless there were at least 2 people in a group. However, this one was a special kind. It was a degraded gate from the class classification. Soloing such a gate was incredibly difficult due to the powerful monsters inside. Worse yet, the tunnel structure of the gate only allowed solo entry. That meant unless a person was at least a rank, clearing the gate was practically impossible. But sometimes luck didn't matter. He told himself that if one was truly unfortunate, they'd end up facing hundreds of monsters alone in a pitch-black, narrow tunnel. He looked into the dark passage ahead and said that he was starting to like it. A monster appeared in front of him and he swiftly killed it. From its corpse, he extracted a Mara stone. As the creature fell, he identified it as a black-fanged snake, a venomous beast known for its paralyzing poison, which could affect even with a mere graze. The gloves he wore were stained with a bit of the toxin, but he wasn't concerned. He casually remarked that killing it earned him 300,000 won. As he looked behind, he saw more snakes emerging. Without hesitation, he killed them all one by one. After clearing out the mess, he began searching the bodies for magic stones. But none of the snakes had dropped one. He thought to himself that if this place was anything like his previous world, the drop rate for magic stones from black fang snakes was less than 3%. It looked like he would need to kill a few hundred more to get results. Pressing deeper into the dangerous dungeon, he finally encountered the boss of the gate, a massive snake, far larger than any of the others. He was relieved, saying it was convenient that the path ended here. He decided to finish things quickly and return. However, he noticed his attacks weren't landing properly. The snake's body was covered in tough armor, rendering his punches ineffective. Suddenly, the snake's tail whipped around and struck him hard. He stumbled, got back up, and prepared for another round. As he attacked again, he realized this creature was on a completely different level compared to the ones he had fought earlier. Its skin was so durable that physical strikes were doing little to no damage. Frustrated, he thought that if only he had regained his former strength, something like this would be no challenge at all. That's when his eyes caught sight of an old sword lying nearby. Though it looked worn, he acknowledged he had no other choice. He picked it up, thinking that even a worn-out sword could be deadly in the hands of the right wielder. He decided to borrow the weapon for a bit and dashed toward the snake to attack. Dajun considered it an honor for the beast to be slain by his hand. Gripping the sword tightly, he struck once. The blade cleaved through the massive creature, killing it instantly. However, the sword shattered in the process. He admitted to himself that if he hadn't caught it just in time, the situation could have turned into a disaster. Examining the snake's remains, he noticed its sharp tooth. He picked it up and concluded that although it was short for a proper sword, with a little sharpening, it could prove useful. He even remarked that the creature's meat might taste better than Namen, which brought him a small sense of relief. Eventually, he exited the gate, looking weary. The boy remarked how surprising it was that even a lowly B-rank gate could take up so much of his time. Restoring his strength now stood as his top priority. He chuckled to himself, hoping that his old combat acquaintances hadn't seen him in this weakened state. The scene shifted to the shop where Dajun had recently sold his mana stones. At that moment, another customer stood at the counter, trying to sell their own collection. The cashier remarked on the quantity, noting the customer had gathered quite a lot. He reminded him that the commission would be 40%, as usual. The customer objected, saying the commission seemed too expensive. The cashier explained that their rate was actually the cheapest available. He pointed out that the basic commission at gate centers was already 5%, and unlike them, this shop didn't leave transaction records. That meant the customer wouldn't have to pay any taxes. With all that in mind, he insisted the deal was still in the customer's favor, offering a clean, profitable transaction. The customer then asked about the cashier's injuries, particularly his swollen eye. The cashier sighed and said not to ask. It was the result of a crazy bastard who had shown up and beaten their guards senseless, even attacking him. The customer commented that relying on guards too much could be dangerous. He believed that hearing guards based on scale, not rank, was more important. He argued that ranks were mostly for civil servants' convenience and didn't reflect real skill. There was a big difference between a freshly licensed guard and a seasoned hero, who risked their life hunting monsters. While the cashier silently wished the guy would stop lecturing, the customer added that they weren't strangers anymore. They'd known each other for a day or two. He told the cashier to call him if he ever needed help. Just then, he walked into the shop, catching the cashier's attention. The cashier immediately recognized him as the one who had injured him and pointed him out. The customer turned to look and commented on his tall figure and good-looking face. He asked whether this was the one who caused the recent disturbance. He questioned how someone who called themselves a hero could assault an innocent person, reminding him that heroes weren't supposed to lay a hand on civilians. The cashier began to worry. That customer was a 7-year veteran hero with many connections among senior and junior hunters. Getting on his bad side could cause serious trouble. But the man simply told him to mind his own business and get lost. Both the customer and cashier were shocked by how casually the response came. The customer, frustrated, asked if he planned to get revenge for the earlier incident. He insulted him and then paused, remembering that the #1 cause of death for heroes besides monsters was accidental disputes with fellow heroes. His 7 years of experience triggered his instincts. He backed off, saying they'd meet again, and walked away. Meanwhile, he approached the counter with his bag of mana stones. The cashier, still nervous, asked him to place the bag on the scale. When he did, the cashier's eyes widened. They were high-grade mana stones, far superior to what they usually received. He couldn't help but wonder about this man's true identity. The system calculated the total, 150 million won. He quietly thought about how exhausting the day had been and that this amount felt lacking. He extended his hand and demanded the full 150 million. The cashier corrected him, reminding him that the shop took a commission. He stared back with a lazy gaze, prompting the cashier to question if he had said something wrong. He finally responded, saying that the commission would be just 1%, making it 148.5 million. The cashier lost his temper and shouted, insisting that the commission was 40%. He muttered angrily, recalling past experiences, but then pointed out that any transaction over 100 million won required approval from a superior. Dajun told him to get that approval right now. The cashier reluctantly called his boss and explained the situation. As he was still on the line, the man grabbed the phone from his hand and addressed the boss directly. He told him to give the money. The boss responded that he understood and asked to speak with his employee again. Instead, he threw the phone against the wall, but it didn't break. He repeated the boss's words and demanded the money. The cashier obeyed and brought out the full amount in paper bags. He commented dryly that they should have a cool deal next time, too. The cashier thought bitterly about that phrase. Since when was a deal cool for only one side? 10 minutes later, the boss arrived, frustrated. He asked why the cashier hadn't answered the phone and demanded an explanation for the earlier call. But the cashier had reached his limit. He announced he was quitting and said he couldn't take it anymore. As the boss stood there, still on a call, the cashier saw him speaking into the phone. The boss was asking someone named Julian to come over. Moments later, a beautiful woman entered the shop. The boss welcomed her warmly. The manager addressed her directly, and she confirmed her name was Julian. The cashier immediately recognized her. She was a fourth-rank hero, Julian. He vaguely recalled that she was the boss's niece, but he couldn't figure out why she had come. She simply said her uncle had called her. Apparently, he was dealing with a headache involving a hero interfering with the mana stone transactions. She added that she didn't yet know the full details. The scene shifted to Dajun's house, where he sat in quiet meditation. He reflected on the harsh reality. Despite hunting all day, he barely managed to earn 100 million won. At this pace, everything would be too late. He knew he had to be capable of solo hunting an S-rank dungeon within a day or sooner. To do that, the most important requirement was to regain the strength he once had. But unlike his past world, the mana in this atmosphere felt lacking. Even if he gathered mana like this every day for 3 years, it still might not be enough. It might take even longer than that. The boy considered that getting some decent equipment would help, but unfortunately there wasn't much to be found here, not even under many trash-tier items. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw Yang playing with a teddy bear. A sudden chill ran through him. He sensed something and quickly rushed toward her, telling her to go inside immediately. Grandma, concerned, asked what was going on. Just then, the ground trembled violently beneath them, but he realized this wasn't an earthquake. It was the telltale sign of a rift opening. Grandma was bewildered, questioning what in the world was happening. He warned her to stay in her room. It was dangerous. Without hesitation, he rushed straight into the rift. Meanwhile, at the Hero Association, an operator reported that a new rift had been detected on the map. A man ordered immediate action, identify the location, and dispatch nearby heroes without delay. The operator confirmed the rift had appeared in the yard of a private residence. The man frowned. A rift in a private residence was particularly troublesome. If a civilian, not a hero, entered the rift, entry would be blocked until they came back out. Worse still, if the civilian died inside, it would trigger a monster wave that would persist for 10 days in the rift zone. That would endanger the entire soul area. He asked if the identity of the person who entered had been confirmed. Another staff member at the computer answered. The person's name was Dajun. He was a resident of the house where the rift had opened. His maternal grandmother claimed he entered the rift in an attempt to save his younger sister. The leader processed the report. If he wasn't a registered hero, that meant a civilian had entered a newly formed rift. He asked for the probability of a monster wave occurring. The technician answered grimly, 99.99%. Elsewhere, a woman reacted in shock. She asked what was meant by Dajun awakening. It was his stepmother. A subordinate explained that, based on past reports, he had crossed paths with heroes and likely awakened during a previous gate event. The woman was furious, cursing him. She said it would have been better if they had killed him outright rather than complicating things. She reminded them that she had accepted money for that task and demanded they inform the assassin that if he failed to kill Dojun, he'd have to pay back 10 times the amount he had received. But the man told her there was no need to contact the assassin. She asked what he meant by that. The man explained that a new rift had opened at Dojun's own house and that it had been confirmed he had entered it. He added that this would soon be public knowledge, as the media would announce it shortly. The woman thought to herself that this meant they wouldn't have to see that vulgar man again. The man confirmed her assumption but told her to remain alert until they were absolutely certain. She agreed, and he acknowledged her instructions. Inside the rift, Dojun looked around and found it difficult to believe what he was seeing. It resembled the Paisha forest he used to visit often as a child. The structure of the forest, the shapes of the trees, and the grass, they were all familiar. With the abundance of mana in the atmosphere, even the shape of the sky and the fluttering of the trout matched exactly. He wondered if the path ahead might lead to what he suspected. As he proceeded further, he saw it. The world tree stood before him. A primordial spirit tree, the world tree held a concentrated flow of pure mana. It was the very reason that his world had once been destroyed. When the world tree was burned, the mana flow was thrown into chaos. But here, the world tree seemed intact. It had remained hidden, untouched. He realized that standing in its presence might allow him to recover the vast power he once possessed. With quiet determination, Dojun sat down and began to meditate in front of the world tree, channeling the ancient mana it held. For 10 consecutive days, Dojun focused solely on his breathing. During that entire period, he forgot about eating and drinking. Nothing else mattered. The boy's concentration remained fixed, unwavering, completely immersed in the act of breathing alone. Then on the 10th day, a presence emerged behind him. It was a creature known as Volcana. He identified it instantly. These were the same monsters that had once burned down the world tree. Standing firm in front of them, he prepared himself to kill every last one of them. He thought it would have been useful to have a weapon with a water element, but decided that it no longer mattered. Determined, Dojun declared to himself that he would annihilate them all. With a simple movement of his hand, a shockwave burst forth. The force of it instantly killed one of the creatures. He explained to himself that one of his arm had released condensed mana, shaped and detonated in an instant. It had been a while since he had released that kind of attack, and now that he had done so, he felt the rush of power again. It was fun. More monsters prepared to strike, rushing toward him. But as they charged, none of them managed to land a hit. Not a single one touched him. His attention shifted briefly. He had now confirmed the safety of the world tree. With that concern eased, he turned his focus inward, toward the mana within his own body. He decided to examine it with his own eyes. Reaching toward a charging monster, he grabbed it directly by the mouth and halted its attack. With a tight grip, he crushed the creature effortlessly. One after another, the monsters fell. The confirmation was complete. With the threat cleared, he mused that once he finished off the remaining enemies, he would probably be able to obtain the undying ember. He remembered that this item had a rather high drop rate. Curious, he looked forward to seeing how many would drop this time. More enemies appeared, and again, he wiped out several of them. With the battle done, he returned to meditation. Then at last, it appeared, the undying ember. Holding it, he reflected on what it took to gain it again. He considered the possibility of drawing more mana from the world tree, but acknowledged that with his current body, it was impossible. Instead, the only option available to him now was to absorb the ember and convert his mana into a fire attribute. He recalled how in the past, he hadn't even needed to absorb the ember. Now it took him 10 whole minutes just to absorb a single one. Still, he accepted the situation and focused on what he could do. He moved his hands again and found more embers appearing before him. Looking at them, he made up his mind. He would continue absorbing them, holding his focus steady, and pushing forward with the task for as long as he could. The rift had grown more unstable by the hour, pulsing with unnatural energy, and the risk was steadily expanding. Journalists gathered around with eager cameras, and the growing crowd stared anxiously, murmuring among themselves. Suddenly, a black car rolled toward the rift, carrying a group of officials. Among them sat a man whose expression was already twisted with irritation. Bang was visibly frustrated. He couldn't believe that because of one reckless boy, they were now stuck dealing with this mess. Kim, seated beside him, tried to offer some clarity, explaining that the boy had only entered the rift in an attempt to save his younger sister. But Bang immediately dismissed the idea. He didn't believe it for a second. In his mind, Dajun had entered not out of love or duty, but because he'd heard some foolish rumor that awakening in a rift zone was easier, and he'd run off chasing strength without a second thought about the consequences. If the boy wanted to die, Bang muttered bitterly to himself. Then he should have done so quietly, not dragged innocent people into it by causing a rift outbreak in the middle of the city. Another official asked what the guild master had to say about the situation, but Bang shrugged the question off. The master had only repeated the same standard protocol, wait for the wave to come and assess then. But even he had his hands full this time. The rift wasn't unique to their location, it had opened simultaneously across the globe. The US, China, the UK, Turkey, Switzerland, all at once. And while every other country had managed to stabilize their situations early, theirs was now in disarray, all because of one kid who thought the world would bend to his will. Bang was seething. He'd already decided that if the boy ever returned, he'd show no mercy. The moment Dajun stepped out of the rift, Bang swore to himself he'd make him pay for what he caused. Time passed. 28 days had gone by since the rift first appeared. The Hero Association had now issued a level 1 monster wave alert. The situation was growing dire. If the civilian who had first entered, referred to now simply as Mr. S, didn't emerge in the next 2 days, the alert would escalate. Just then, the ongoing news broadcast was abruptly cut off. In a quiet office elsewhere, a sharp-eyed man turned to his secretary and asked if Mr. S was, in fact, Dajun. The secretary nodded. He'd already confirmed it through his operatives. There was no doubt it was Dajun. The man leaned back, mulling it over. He asked with a calm detachment what the odds were of Dajun returning alive. The secretary, equally cold, said that if Dajun was just a civilian, then talking about his chances was meaningless. It was less than 0.1%. The man broke into a devilish grin. The idea of Dajun being merely a civilian was laughable to him. After all, those who had tried to extort Dajun had already been soundly beaten. The fools in the Hero Association were simply misinformed, believing he was weak only because they lacked real intelligence. The man mused silently, what if Dajun really had awakened? But the secretary cautioned that even if he had, it all depended on what rank he achieved. Just being able to fight didn't mean he could survive a rift. Strength and survivability were two very different things. Still, the man's mind spun with possibility. He suddenly recalled that Dajun had 2 family members. His lips curled into another dark smile. He would secure them just in case. The secretary asked cautiously what he planned to do with them. But the man's eyes glinted with malice. If Dajun died, they would sell his family off for profit. And if he lived, they'd claim they had taken care of them and saddle him with an enormous debt. Meanwhile, deep inside the rift, Dajun stood once again before the world tree, its trunk radiating soft blue light from the energy that poured endlessly out of it. He'd been powering up for what felt like an eternity and had long lost track of time. Hundreds of undying ambers had already been absorbed into his body, and their power surged within him. Now, at will, he could wield flame attribute mana, and his resistance to fire had soared. If he focused only on the fire attribute, his current strength even surpassed the days when he had once been called the Sword God in another world. He stood quietly, pressing his hand against the bark of the glowing world tree, whispering his thanks then and now. It had granted him strength again and again. Looking around one last time, he gathered the remaining mana stones, placing them carefully in a bag. As he stepped away, a part of him knew that he might never see the tree again. But if they ever crossed paths in the future, and if the tree ever needed his help, he silently vowed that he would protect it without hesitation. With that promise lingering in the air, he turned away, his body hardened and honed, scarred and muscular, disappearing into the glowing distance. Night had already fallen in the real world. Dajun emerged quietly from the now-closed rift. He immediately noticed the silence. There wasn't a single presence within a 1-kilometer radius. It was obvious that the entire area had been evacuated in preparation for a potential wave. He stretched out his senses and released a slight pulse of aura in one direction, then followed it. Soon he sensed two officials monitoring the rift perimeter. Their uniforms were familiar. They belonged to the Hero Association, the same ones from the last gate. He sighed inwardly. Dealing with them again would be a hassle. So he acted. Without hesitation, he summoned fire mana, forming a small amber and hurling it toward an abandoned junkyard nearby. It landed with deadly precision, erupting into a controlled but dramatic explosion. Flames surged high into the sky, illuminating the surroundings with chaotic light. The officials spun around at the noise. Kim was the first to point it out. A massive fire was now engulfing the junkyard. They shouted to one another, trying to figure out how to contain the flames before they reached nearby buildings. From a quiet spot at a distance, Dajan observed them with calm detachment. He noted how accurately the flames had struck the junkyard. The control, the strength, it was almost too perfect. And then he smiled faintly, remembering Cusack, the strongest flame mage on the continent from his previous life. Cusack would have admired this flame. That thought brought a brief warmth to his heart. Back at the rift, Kim suddenly turned toward Bang, telling him to look. As they both turned, they saw that the rift was gone. No monster wave, no signs of destabilization, just the faint traces of purple flames still dancing in the air before they, too, flickered out without a trace. The rift had completely closed before they could even respond. It left no clues, no monsters, nothing. And far away, Dajan was walking calmly down the road, his pace unhurried. He turned his head slightly, catching a final glimpse of the spot where the rift had once been. A faint smile curled at the edge of his lips. He was finally free. The next day, it hit the news like a thunderclap. The newly emerged rift in the Maple area had vanished early that very morning. Even more strangely, that day marked exactly 29 days since Mr. Dajan, a non-registered resident of Zone Z, had entered the rift. The Hero Association, which had been bracing itself for a full-scale monster wave, was left dumbfounded by the rift's sudden disappearance. A full-scale investigation into the cause was immediately underway. At the same time, a mysterious fire had broken out in a nearby junkyard, resulting in a massive explosion that left the entire area in ruins. Elsewhere, a young man in a hoodie wandered the streets unnoticed. It was Dajan, concealing his identity beneath the nondescript clothing. Passers-by chattered, some mocking the man who had recklessly dashed into the rift. They said he was probably dead now, adding that it served him right. After all, everyone knew to stay away from a rift once it appeared. But one among them quickly shut the others up. He said that people like them had the luxury to talk big only because others risked their lives inside those hellish cracks. If the rift hadn't disappeared on its own, the entire city would have become a war zone, and then none of them would have had the chance to sit around flapping their mouths. Dajan listened to it all unbothered, but somewhere inside, he felt a twinge of melancholy. If the rift had truly vanished for good, it meant he would never see the world tree again. That alone left a bitter taste. Still, as much of a shame as it was, maybe it was better this way, because there were still things left in this world he had to protect. Eventually, he made his way to the HCS Capitol building. Inside, several men lounged around, cigarettes between their lips, laughing and gloating. They were convinced Dajan was dead, and with him out of the way, the old man and the little girl would be easy prey. Their boss, they believed, would finally have the freedom to act as he pleased, something everyone agreed would be nothing short of despicable. One of them remarked that their boss wasn't just some random thug, but someone dangerous enough that no normal person could handle him. He was confident the boss would squeeze at least 10 times the value out of the 2 remaining victims. Another one took a drag from his cigarette and muttered that while the old man could be discarded, the kid looked decent, maybe even beautiful someday. The boss, he added with a twisted grin, would surely find some way to make use of her. Their chatter stopped cold when a low, eerily familiar voice echoed through the hall. The man asked where their boss was. Heads snapped around. No one moved. Outside, the boss strolled out of his car, casually fixing his hair. The secretary walked beside him, clipboard in hand. The boss was practically glowing, clearly in a good mood. With a grin, he asked what was on his schedule today. The secretary flipped through the notes and replied that there was a lunch appointment with the CEO, but nothing for the evening. That was all the boss needed to hear. He lazily told the secretary to contact Madame Kang and inform her that he'd be paying her a visit tonight. If there were any new girls, he wanted them all dressed up. He was planning to enjoy himself. But before they could enter the building, a chaotic uproar grabbed their attention. The boss barely had time to react before something slammed into him, sending him flying and coughing up blood. As he struggled to his feet, gasping, his eyes met those of a young man lounging on a chair with his feet kicked up on the table. It was Dajun, and his glare was ice cold. Dajun didn't raise his voice, but the threat was clear. He told the boss to crawl over like a dog. The command was simple, yet it carried an overwhelming weight. The boss froze, drenched in sweat. When he hesitated, Dajun repeated himself. Didn't he hear? He said, bark. Someone like the boss didn't even deserve to be treated like a person. If he wanted to live, he'd better act like a proper mutt. Terror-stricken, the boss began to bark, but it was weak, unconvincing. Dajun demanded more. He wanted him to bark like he meant it, like a dog who knew his place. While the pathetic noises echoed across the room, Dajun turned to the others. He called them out for being spineless hypocrites, always bowing and scraping when he was in front of them, but ready to betray him the moment they thought he was gone. He asked the boss if he honestly believed this was the first time he'd dealt with a scumbag like him. The boss dropped to the floor, forehead pressed against the ground. He begged Dajun to spare him, swearing he'd be loyal from now on, loyal like a dog if that's what it took. But Dajun wasn't buying any of it. With a sharp kick, he sent the man tumbling, then told the secretary flatly that he was the boss now. He didn't want to see decent men like the secretary working under garbage like this anymore. After all, the secretary had always been good at cleaning up trash, and now he had permission to get rid of this piece of it too. The secretary quickly knelt and pleaded. The boss, he explained, had connections. If he vanished now, it would raise suspicions, and people would start sniffing around. Wouldn't it be wiser to give the boss one more chance to make things right? But Dajun's gaze was cutting. He asked if dumping someone in a barrel and tossing it into the sea wasn't the secretary's trademark, or crushing them in a junkyard, which everyone knew he was capable of. He warned the man that if he didn't deal with the boss now, he would be the one thrown into a gate as monster food. Everyone in the room stiffened in terror. The boss, still groveling, resumed his begging, promising over and over that he'd do anything, anything at all, if Dajun just let him live. Dajun turned away, knowing he should kill the man to avoid trouble later. But strangely, he found himself hesitating. Maybe he was going soft. He raised his hand toward the boss, who took it as a sign of forgiveness and began thanking him profusely, saying he would serve him like a big brother from now on. But Dajun's expression didn't soften. Without a word, he activated his fire ability and seared one of the boss's hands. Then, as the man screamed in agony, he ripped it off, tossing the charred flesh aside like garbage. He stared down at him, unmoved. This, he said, was the final chance. From now on, the boss's sole duty would be to protect Dajun's family. If anything happened to them, even a scratch, Dajun swore he would slaughter every last one of them without hesitation. If they wanted to survive, then they would have to guard them day and night, 24 hours a day, for the rest of their lives. Officially, Dajun had been declared missing, presumed dead, lost to the rift along with the collapsing dimensional field. News outlets had already published obituaries and retrospectives, and even the government had issued statements confirming his death. Every media channel repeated the same story. The boy was gone. Yet here he was, sitting calmly inside a small restaurant, watching his sister devour her food with gleaming eyes. As he stared at the news articles on his phone, a quiet realization settled in. There was no need to reveal he'd come back. Doing so would only invite chaos, unwanted attention, and more trouble than he or his family could afford. He knew they'd have to move soon, especially with the boss likely changing locations. But there was no need to rush. For now, he wanted his little sister to enjoy herself. She was beaming, eating until her stomach could hold no more, clearly delighted by the rare treat. When he told her they'd be moving to a new place soon and that she could go to kindergarten like the other kids, her smile wavered. That subtle shift in expression didn't go unnoticed. When he asked what was wrong, she hesitated before explaining that the other children had made fun of her for not having a mom or a dad. The weight of her words struck him harder than expected. With a voice both gentle and firm, he told her she didn't need to go to kindergarten if she didn't want to. There was no reason to see kids who bullied her. She could just start school next year like everyone else. That brought her smile back, brighter than ever, and she seemed relieved, even thrilled at the idea of skipping kindergarten altogether. Watching her, Dajun quietly considered whether a prestigious private school might be better for her, somewhere no one would dare to look down on her again. That thought led his mind to a memory. Not long ago, he had barged into a rundown motel in the middle of the night, demanding to know why his grandmother and sister were staying there. It was a shady place, crawling with drunks and shady characters. The staff calmly explained that the motel was under their management and was, in fact, relatively safe compared to what it looked like. But Dajun didn't care about their assurances. He just wanted to see his family. The moment he stepped into the room, both his grandmother and sister stared at him in shock. For a brief moment, they couldn't move. Then, as if waking from a dream, they ran to him. His grandmother grabbed his hands tightly, whispering that she wasn't imagining things. Her boy had come back. His sister cried as she hugged him, and all he could do was smile softly and reassure them that yes, he was home, and yes, he was alive. Back in the present, the girl looked up at him with curiosity and asked if he was a hero. That question caught him off guard. He half joked, asking if she would still like him if he were. But instead of the enthusiastic response he expected, she told him she hoped he wasn't one. Heroes, she said, had to fight scary monsters. Sometimes they didn't come back. She didn't want her brother to go off and die like that. She just wanted him to stay with them for a very long time. Her honesty stunned him. Even now, even after all he'd been through in the ruined, monster-filled world where he had survived while everything else fell apart, hearing that someone wanted him to live, not fight, shook something deep inside him. He had lost so much in that other world. Years of bloodshed had taken away more than just people. They had dulled what was precious. But maybe, just maybe, he could protect something small and peaceful now. If his family truly wanted him to live, then perhaps that was enough. He didn't need to be obsessed with slaying monsters anymore. Elsewhere, inside the towering headquarters of the Hero Association, another conversation was unfolding. Nat, the founder of the Hero Association and director of the World Hero Federation, stood in a massive office, gazing at the reports stacked on his desk. He asked his secretary if there had been any findings, but she regretfully informed him that they still hadn't discovered anything. He found that troubling. If a rift could disappear without warning, then it could reappear just as suddenly, and that kind of unpredictability was dangerous. The secretary added that, logically, the rift should have triggered a wave. But Nat cut her off before she could finish her thought. He was more concerned with the fact that the city had been spared. Perhaps the sudden disappearance of the rift was a blessing in disguise. If it had released a wave, the consequences would have been catastrophic. The secretary quickly realized her mistake and apologized for being careless. She understood how serious this was. Nat wasn't just a powerful man, he was one of the most respected heroes in the world, ranked in the top 100. If he ever decided to run for president, polls suggested he'd win by a historic landslide. Corporate giants feared him. Political rivals avoided him. But Nat had no interest in politics or business. His only focus was on protecting people and preparing for whatever lay beyond the rifts. He told the secretary to keep digging, no matter how long it took. She nodded and also informed him that the homeowner near the previous rift site had agreed to sell. Nat instructed her to offer more than the market value. If the extra compensation brought even a sliver of comfort after such trauma, it would be worth it. But just as he looked through another stack of reports, something odd caught his eye. The rift hadn't been an isolated event. Similar occurrences had been reported in multiple countries. According to the documents, the US and China had managed to contain their incidents swiftly, but the situation in the UK was worsening. Their trusted heroes had already been deployed elsewhere, leaving them unprepared to respond in time. At that moment, an emergency alert flashed across Nat's screen. The UK had officially declared a state of high alert. Civilians were being advised to evacuate. A wave had been detected. The World Hero Federation had sounded the alarm. The next disaster had already begun. Outside the bustling streets, Dajun stood once again before the Mana Stone Exchange, a heavy bag slung over his shoulder. Without hesitation, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, ready to greet the customer, but the words caught in his throat as his eyes widened. It was him, the boy who had flipped the shop's commission system upside down. Panic took over, and the receptionist immediately called out for the manager, shouting that the kid who had forced the shop to accept a 1% commission deal had returned. The manager, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression and the kind of build that usually made people think twice, stormed out from the back room. He fixed his intense gaze on Dajun, clearly attempting to intimidate him. But Dajun remained calm, his tone collected as he remarked that the timing was perfect. He had a large number of mana stones to sell that day, and it seemed only proper that someone with actual authority should handle it instead of leaving things to the brat at the front desk. As he spoke, he dropped the bag onto the floor with a muffled thud. The manager looked at it with disinterest, already assuming that the kid had once again brought in a pile of unrefined, low-grade stones. Without bothering to check, he flatly refused to do business, telling Dajun to leave immediately. Confused, Dajun asked why, only to receive a cold explanation that the 1% commission was costing the shop a significant loss, and that they weren't about to repeat the mistake of doing business with someone who forced deals onto them. Dajun couldn't help but laugh. He casually remarked that the manager was going to regret turning him away like this, but the man clearly wasn't interested in hearing anything further. He said there was no point in explaining how the Gate Center operated on a 5% commission, or how the entire mana stone distribution system was already complicated enough. In his eyes, there was little value in trying to reason with an arrogant kid who didn't understand the way the business worked. Turning with a harsh expression, the manager ordered Dajun once more to pick up his bag and leave, warning him never to return to the shop again. But instead of replying, Dajun gave the bag a light kick. Several stones spilled out, rolling across the polished floor. Both the receptionist and the manager froze in shock. These weren't the cheap, low-grade stones they had expected. These were something entirely different, hero mana stones. The manager's expression shifted instantly. He recognized the telltale shimmer and the dense mana signature. A single hero mana stone could sell at any price a person was willing to name. His mind raced. How could a kid like this be carrying something so rare? With a casual shrug, Dajun remarked that if they weren't interested in buying the low-grade stones, then maybe they should just forget about it. But now the manager's priorities had completely changed. Hero mana stones weren't just rare, they were legendary. There had once been a lord from Mexico named Kira, a prominent figure known for dismantling mana stones to manufacture medicinal items. One day, he tried the same with a hero mana stone, and it exploded. The resulting burst of power didn't kill him. It awakened him as one of the world's most powerful heroes. Since then, such stones had become coveted not only as a mana source, but also as catalysts for awakening potential. Their value soared, making them essential commodities for those seeking power. Faced with the reality of what was lying on his floor, the manager no longer had the courage to reject the boy. Yet Dajun, unmoved, told them to pack the stones back into the bag he'd be leaving. The manager instantly changed his tone, now calling Dajun a valuable customer and practically begging him to stay. While the receptionist scrambled to gather the stones with shaky hands, the manager offered Dajun a cold drink and invited him to sit for a moment. Trying to sound casual, he asked why Dajun had lowered the commission even further from 1% to 0.5%. Wasn't that a bit extreme? But Dajun didn't offer an explanation. He simply replied that if they felt it was too low, then they shouldn't take the deal. The manager, sweating now, hastily clarified that he didn't mean it that way. He was just curious about the reasoning. Dajun, clearly annoyed, replied that the reason was simple. The manager was irritating him. That was enough to justify the change. The manager began banging his head on the table, apologizing profusely and admitting he had spoken without thinking. But Dajun, growing weary of the theatrics, cut to the point and asked whether they would match the rate or not. From the side, the receptionist was quietly seething, watching in disbelief as Dajun refused to show even a shred of respect toward the manager. Desperate to salvage the situation, the manager began rambling about the rarity of mana stones. Most companies, he claimed, would jump at the chance to buy them at market price without any commission just to secure supply. But Dajun had already had enough of the lecture. Rising from his seat, he calmly stated that if the manager didn't like the rate, then he should simply sell the stones to someone else. Panicked, the manager backpedaled fast. He raised the commission offer to 9%, pleading that even at that rate they'd be making a loss. Dajun remained completely unaffected and advised them not to take losses then, just walk away from the deal. As the manager continued to negotiate, the numbers slid downward, 8%, then 7%, and finally 6.6%. He whispered that if his boss found out about this, he might literally be beaten to death. Dajun raised an eyebrow and chuckled that in that case, they should try not to give their bosses a reason. The back and forth continued until the manager, barely able to breathe, finally agreed to return to 1%. Dajun relented, saying he'd accept the original rate just this once for old time's sake. The manager was completely undone. He wanted to accuse the boy of being a master swindler but couldn't say a word. The stones were simply too valuable to let go. And just as the manager thought the madness had ended, Dajun calmly revealed that he had 7 more bags full of hero mana stones. The color drained from both the manager's and the receptionist's faces. The manager barked at the receptionist to stop standing around like a statue and hurry up with the contract paperwork. Moments later, a notification chimed on Dajun's phone. He glanced at the screen and saw a new deposit, 67 billion won, transferred from the stone shop. At this rate, even that 110 billion won mansion he'd been eyeing didn't seem so out of reach anymore. But as satisfying as the deal had been, Dajun knew there was a deeper problem. Gates alone couldn't provide high-grade mana stones, and until he could roam freely through all the rifts, there would always be a ceiling to his income. Just then, his phone buzzed again. This time, the alert tone was different. He checked the screen, and both the manager and receptionist watched him closely as tension crept back into the room. When the manager asked what was going on, Dajun replied without hesitation that it was an emergency alert from the UK. A monster wave had broken out in their southern region. After reading the public service announcement, Dajun scoffed to himself. The officials, the guilds, the self-proclaimed protectors of humanity, they were all the same. Ineffective, disorganized, and too scared to make the hard calls. In his past life in that other world, he wouldn't have hesitated. He would have charged through every rift, sealed every tear in reality with his own blood if necessary, all while ignoring whatever country or authority dared try to stop him. But not anymore. That Dajun was long gone. This time he chose peace over senseless war. The scene shifted, the tension melting away as the air filled with the savory aroma of premium meat sizzling on a charcoal grill. Thick cuts glistened over open flames, sending juices dripping into the embers below. Across the table, Dajun's little sister stared with sparkling eyes and drooling lips, captivated by the sight, while their grandmother looked less enchanted and more panicked. They were seated in a high-class restaurant where even a single serving of meat, just 100 grams, cost an outrageous 250,000 won. The old lady couldn't help but frown in concern, quietly asking Dajun how on earth he planned to pay for something this expensive. But the boy simply smiled and reassured her not to worry, telling her to eat as much as she wanted because he had earned more than enough money this time. His grandmother remained hesitant, but his sister wasted no time. She took a bite, and her eyes rolled back in pure bliss as the tender meat melted in her mouth. Watching her reaction, Dajun glanced at the platter and realized the portions were far too small. He casually waved over the butler, ordering 4 more servings of the same premium meat for each of them. Again, the old woman interjected, worried about waste and wondering how 3 people could possibly eat so much. But Dajun just chuckled and insisted that she eat to her heart's content. Today was a day to celebrate. Coming from such a poor background, they had never even dreamed of places like this. It was time they finally tasted what life had denied them. The grandmother was still reluctant, but Dajun's sister nudged a piece toward her, urging her to try just 1 bite. And when she finally did, her face lit up. The texture, the seasoning, the way it simply dissolved on her tongue, it was worth every one. With that, the 3 of them tucked in and started enjoying their meal with genuine smiles. But the pleasant moment didn't last long. The sharp click of approaching heels cut through the warmth of the room. Someone was walking up to their table with purpose. It was none other than Julian, the famed female hunter. Her presence alone turned heads, and her commanding voice sliced through the air as she called out to Dajun, asking for a moment of his time. Without even glancing up from the grill, Dajun calmly told her that he was eating with his family and that if she had business with him, she could wait. The casual dismissal stunned everyone, but especially Julian, who blinked in disbelief. Surely he hadn't understood who she was. So she clarified, introducing herself again as Julian, a high-ranking hunter. Yet Dajun remained unfazed, simply continuing to serve his sister another slice of meat. Julian could hardly believe what was happening. She was used to people groveling for a moment of her time, not the other way around. And yet here she was being made to wait. So she did. The top 10 ranked beauty in the world, an S-ranked hero admired across nations, found herself sitting quietly in the waiting area as Dajun finished his meal at his own pace. The onlookers whispered among themselves, astonished. What kind of man could keep someone like Julian waiting? The answer came in the form of data. Julian had done her homework. 2 months ago, Dajun had stepped into his first gate. Not only had he survived, but he had reemerged stronger. Rumors had circulated about his supposed death in a high-level rift, but clearly those were false. He was alive and well, devouring expensive meat in a luxury restaurant with his family. That alone set him apart. His composure, his control, the way he treated even an S-rank like a minor inconvenience. Julian found it difficult to grasp. While she pondered these things, Dajun finally stepped out of the restaurant, his family laughing beside him as they discussed how delicious everything had been. But his gaze quickly locked onto a familiar face. Julian was still waiting, but that wasn't what caught his attention. Standing nearby, looking just as surprised, was Kang, the very man who had abandoned Dajun in that lethal dungeon to die. Kang's expression twisted as recognition dawned. He stared at Dajun like he was seeing a ghost. His voice dripped with venom as he muttered that Dajun was like a cockroach, always crawling out of impossible situations when he should have just died already. He called him a vermin, a pest that just wouldn't stay down. Julian was caught off guard. Of all people, Dajun was bickering with Kang. She didn't understand what history they shared, but something was clearly burning between them. Before Kang could get another insult out, Dajun turned to Julian and said that if she had something to say, now was the time. Kang froze, his eyes darting between the two. He was baffled. Why was Julian waiting for someone like Dajun? But Dajun ignored him, his focus now on the woman. With a firm tone, he told Julian that if she wanted to talk, she'd have to do him a small favor first. Julian raised a brow, unsure of what kind of request was coming. Dajun simply pointed to his grandmother and sister, explaining that all he wanted was for her to call a cab and make sure they got home safely. That was it. He had other matters to deal with. Julian was puzzled, wondering what he planned to do next. But Dajun gave her a cold, sidelong glance and said that their conversation could wait. He had a debt to collect from an old friend. His tone made it clear. He hadn't forgotten what Kang did. And now it was time to settle it. Julian calmly approached Dajun's grandmother and little sister, placing a gentle hand on the door of the cab and urging them to get inside. She spoke softly but firmly, telling them not to worry and assuring them that she would handle everything. Even though the two were visibly anxious, the authority in her voice convinced them. With a flick of her hand, she instructed the cab driver to take them safely to their hotel, waving them off as the vehicle pulled away. Back inside, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Dajun stood with his body lowered into a tight fighting stance, each of his movements controlled and coiled with force. His fists flew with terrifying precision, landing on Kang's face and ribs with bone-cracking impact. Every punch he delivered was packed with intent, not just to hurt, but to punish. Kang staggered backward but still refused to yield, laughing bitterly through bloodied lips and swearing he'd crush the cockroach once and for all. A terrified waitress tried to intervene, stepping between them despite her fear. She pleaded with Kang, her voice trembling, begging him not to cause a scene inside the restaurant. But instead of listening, the man's rage exploded. With a vicious snarl, he struck her across the face, sending her tumbling to the floor. She would have hit hard if not for a nearby customer who caught her just in time, steadying her and shielding her from further harm. Kang wasn't done. His eyes scanned the restaurant, wild and violent. He shouted threats, claiming ownership of the place, warning that if anyone dared to interfere, he'd kill them on the spot. The entire room froze in fear. But for Dajun, that was the final straw. His expression darkened as he stepped forward, and with a single powerful strike, he smashed his fist into Kang's swollen face, sending blood spraying across the table. He stood over the man, his voice cold as steel, asking if Kang really had been the one who left him to die inside that gate. Kang, now bleeding from multiple places and barely able to stand, couldn't even answer. Dajun wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Kang spat blood and sneered, as delusional as ever. He taunted Dajun, mocking his past, reminding him how his father abandoned him and how even his stepmother had no use for him. It was venomous and low. But Dajun didn't respond with words. Instead, he calmly pulled out his phone and held it up, demanding Kang repeat what he had just said. Kang laughed, thinking it was a bluff. He called Dajun pathetic and dared him to do something. Then, as if digging his own grave, he crossed a line no one should ever cross. He began insulting Dajun's mother. That was enough. Dajun's eyes glowed faintly, and before Kang could even finish his sentence, the boy moved. A pulse of psychic energy erupted from him, and his mana surged. The next punch Kang threw never even connected. Dajun's abilities diffused it midair with invisible force, redirecting the momentum and hurling Kang several meters back like a ragdoll. He crashed into a table, flipping over it and groaning in pain, stunned that his full-force blow had been so effortlessly dismantled. Kang's body lit with a blue aura, and his mana surged as he tried to power up further. But Dajun didn't flinch. He took a step forward and with a flash launched himself toward his opponent, finally ready to finish what had been long overdue. In the chaos, the trembling waitress fumbled with her phone, trying to call the authorities. But her hands were shaking too much to remember the emergency number. Just then, Julian appeared beside her and gently took the phone from her hand, telling the girl that she would handle everything and there was no need to be afraid. As she turned toward the escalating battle, Julian's trained eyes took in the situation instantly. The raw strength, the fluid movements, Kang, who was an A, B-ranked hunter, was being completely overpowered. There was no doubt in her mind anymore. Dajun was beyond B-rank. He was easily A-rank, if not higher. Possibly even S-rank. Her eyes narrowed as she shouted a warning, telling Dajun to stop before he went too far. If he seriously injured Kang, there would be consequences. He might even die. Hearing that, Dajun paused mid-step, glancing at her with a frown, asking what she meant. Julian explained without hesitation. Kang's cousin was none other than Yang, an S-rank hunter with influence and power, and someone who deeply cared for his younger brother. Hurting Kang would mean making an enemy out of Yang, and that was not something people survived easily. But even after hearing that, Dajun didn't look worried. He just stared at her unfazed, and Julian felt a chill. This boy, he wasn't just powerful, he was completely unhinged. He knew the danger. He heard the name Yang and understood the consequences. But still, he had no intention of stopping. Kang, even while lying battered on the ground, gave a bloody smile and dismissed Julian's concerns. She suddenly realized Kang had always acted like this because he knew he had Yang as a shield. That's how he had gotten away with so much for so long. And now, seeing Dajun not just challenge that protection but completely disregard it, Julian was starting to feel something unfamiliar. Fear, not just for the situation, but for the person standing in front of her. Dajun's eyes briefly flicked toward her, and the killing intent in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. It was subtle, not wild or chaotic, but cold and measured, like a predator deciding whether or not she was worth hunting. Julian swallowed, suddenly unsure if she was de-escalating things or making them far, far worse. Meanwhile, the poor waitress had crumpled into a corner, quietly crying into her apron, whispering to herself that the lady said she would handle it. So why did things feel like they were spiraling even more out of control? Kang lay unconscious on the ground, his swollen face barely recognizable. Julian stepped closer, keeping her voice calm as she informed Dajun that she had been sent by her uncle to handle the situation. She apologized for showing up uninvited, admitting it wasn't ideal. Without wasting time, she shifted the topic, saying she already knew that Dajun had recently sold a batch of magic stones at the exchange center. Instead, she wanted to propose something better. She wanted to buy the next batch directly from him. Dajun raised a brow, asking what she was offering. Julian replied confidently, saying she would purchase everything he had at full market price, no undercutting. That caught Dajan off guard. He let out a short laugh, clearly surprised, before Julian added that an S-rank hero's wealth was beyond what most people could imagine. Money wasn't an issue. Still glancing at the unconscious Kang, Dajan told her he wasn't against selling, but he had one condition. It wasn't something complicated. In fact, if she really was an S-rank like she claimed, it would be nothing for her. And if it was Julian herself handling it, then there should be no problem. The scene then shifted. Far from the chaos, in an elegant high-rise office, Dajan's stepmother sat simmering with rage. Her manicured fingers tapped against her desk, and her face was twisted with frustration as she asked how Dajan was still alive. He had entered a rift. He was supposed to be dead. Her secretary, standing respectfully nearby, replied that even the Hero Association had declared him dead. Yet somehow here he was alive. She asked how he planned to fix it, especially after taking so much money to make the boy disappear. But the secretary had other news. He informed her that Kang had gotten into a violent brawl with Dajan. At first, the woman didn't react, but then it clicked. A fight between Kang and Dajan that was going to cause problems. If her husband or father-in-law heard about it, it would be messy. Still, she thought she could smooth things over as long as it didn't reach the media. She immediately ordered the secretary to suppress any media coverage of the incident. No headlines, no leaks. Only Kang's brother needed to know. She also wanted the police kept far away from the matter. Any legal investigation would turn the situation into a public nightmare. But they both knew that wasn't enough. The secretary continued, reminding her that Kang was Yang's cousin, and Yang was an S-rank hunter. Everyone knew Kang was trash, but Yang protected him. In truth, Kang wasn't just family. He was the one doing Yang's dirty work, cleaning up problems and acting as a shield. Now that Kang had been beaten and the media was circling, Yang would be forced to act. The woman understood. The situation was spiraling. She ordered the secretary to schedule a personal meeting with Yang as soon as possible. There was more. She had also discovered that the head of HCS Capital had betrayed her, secretly looking after Dajan's grandmother and little sister. That was unacceptable. She told the secretary to contact Prosecutor Park. She wanted the man to pay for choosing a nobody's family over hers. The next day, the story shifted again. A large crowd had gathered outside a rift zone. South Korea currently had 37 active rift sites, with 5 nearing gate formation. The rest required scheduled hunts handled only by registered association hunters. At the checkpoint, Julian handed over her ID. The guard scanned her credentials, nodded in approval, and wished her good luck. Dajan stood behind her, observing everything quietly. The guards clearly recognized who Julian was. They treated her with respect, but still double-checked everything, locking down security with precision. That level of caution didn't go unnoticed. A girl from the expedition team, Jung, looked over at Julian and raised an eyebrow. Jung was an E-rank hero and leader of the Velvet Guild. She found it odd that someone of Julian's rank would bother with something as tedious as Rift Zone hunts. When asked, Julian replied with a nervous chuckle that she was just bored. With nothing else to do, she figured she might as well explore a rift. Meanwhile, Dajan had already made his terms clear earlier. If she wanted the magic stones, she had to let him enter the rift with her. Once that was done, he'd sell the entire batch at full market price, no markup, no tricks. When Julian asked why he was going this far, Dajan simply replied that nothing paid better than hunting in a rift. That was all. Julian couldn't quite understand it. Why would someone voluntarily risk their life for money? Was he truly that desperate? Maybe he was just reckless. Regardless, she needed those hero-grade magic stones, and if it meant dealing with Dajan, so be it. Even if this was a suicide mission for him, it wasn't her concern. The team soon entered the rift. The world on the other side was a thick, humid jungle filled with strange sounds and shadows moving between trees. The group stayed cautious. Jung glanced at Dajan and leaned closer to Julian, asking who the quiet guy trailing behind them was. Julian didn't want to answer and brushed it off, saying he was just someone she knew. But Jung wasn't satisfied. She asked if Dajan was boyfriend material. Julian shot that down instantly. No, she said flatly. She owed him a favor, nothing more. That was the only reason she brought him. Jung seemed confused. An S-rank hero like Julian owing a favor to a nobody, that didn't make sense. But before she could ask anything more, the jungle exploded into chaos. A massive bird with gigantic wings burst through the treetops, shrieking as it flew toward the team. The hunters immediately fell into defensive formation. Orders were shouted to block the creature's legs, to hold its wings down before it could fly. But before any of that could happen, Dajun broke into a sprint. He ran straight toward the monster, ignoring all formation plans. It was a reckless move, or so they thought. The other hunters gasped, unsure whether to chase after him or retreat. But then they heard his calm voice cut through the noise. Dajun simply said that the bird was already down before it could even fly. And to their disbelief, the beast's wings twitched once, then collapsed.